coming out to the Black April Refugee History Tour experience. I want to go ahead and start today with a focus on a single word. And that word is necessity. Because, as we have in the common citation, everybody loves Malcolm X. Everyone loves citing Malcolm X. Malcolm X is our hero. We get it. We love Malcolm X. Malcolm X is the chosen person that every young person latches onto. They want to believe in the glory and the righteousness of the violent revolution. They tell themselves freedom or death. And they cite Malcolm X. So I want to slow down. Because in his own words, this is the time of his autobiography. It's by any means that necessary. I want to focus on the question of necessity. Because this is actually the current position of the state of Vietnam, is that everything that occurred, every single thing that happened from 1945 until now, was absolutely necessary. Had to happen. Couldn't have happened any other way. The violence did have to occur. It was all necessary. But even in the citation of the most radical person, hero in American politics, it's not always necessary. So the question of the necessity of all things is set. And here we have a timeline. Please bear with me, this is my camera, I'm just going to that. But this is a timeline by which the media community here in Orange County contests this notion of necessity. We have a brief and comparative timeline of independence movements, post-colonialism in Southeast Asia. So we have, starting from 1945, we have the Philippines, got their independence in 45. We have in 1947, we have India, got their independence from colonialism in 1947. We have Burma and Malaysia at the same time in 1948, getting their independence in 1948. Taking the longest out of this comparative trajectory and timeline is Indonesia. In 1949, they got their independence. And then we have Vietnam. Vietnam, over here is 45, and over here is Vietnam question mark, because in 1954, Vietnam only achieved independence for half the country. That's half. And then the final achievement of full independence for the country was only achieved in 1975. And so this begs the question, if all the violence and all the bloodshed and all the dying was necessary, why is Vietnam the only country in the entire region that had to get its independence in such a way, and not only so, took until 1975 to achieve its full independence? If it was necessary, why is it unique? If it was necessary, you would think all of the other countries would have done it. This is a quote from the beginning of the Hong Kong movie from 2000, Victor Van and Infernal Affairs. The quote is this: "What thousands must die, so that Caesar might become great." It is a quote to something Western that I haven't looked at the notation for. The question is this: how many thousands, millions of people need to die so that the great man becomes great? And now, normally at this part, I would have full activities. You can see I have crayons. Normally at this part, I would ask everyone to please, I have sheets of paper, I have crayons, I put on this activity last week. They would start making their own Vietnamese village. I would ask them to draw people, some buildings, but crucially, there are two details about the Vietnamese village. One, just draw some people, and two, choose one industry. And this is the conundrum of Vietnam at the time that the Viet Minh provided their Declaration of Independence in 1945. When they provided their Declaration of Independence in 1945, the Declaration, which is so commonly cited in so many American social sciences classrooms, they love talking about it so much. Here's the basic numerical problem for the Viet Minh when they do that. And the basic numerical problem is they are allowed to declare whatever independence they want. The total population of Vietnam in 1945 was about, if we're going very charitable, 28,000. Well, no, sorry, 20,000 in total. That's very charitable. And the maximum number of French who were ever in Vietnam at the height of their colonization never amounted to more than 30,000. The total population of all Vietnam in this time was about 25 million. So the Vietnamese can declare independence all they want. How?
What Viet Minh mean?
Huh?
Viet Minh. I don't know how.
Vietnam đồng minh quốc hội. So Vietnam. Yeah.
Cách mạng đồng minh hội.
Yeah, it's. I'm going to be using the word Vietnam, Vietnam, all very interchangeably.
Cái hồi mà 954 đó, đại gia thì ở Việt Nam, cái thời mà chống Pháp rồi đó, thì người Việt Nam không có gì bị học.
Lần trước đó là gọi là Việt Nam không?
Phong trào bên cái gì chống Pháp rồi.
Here's the basic problem. Is the traditional structure, and people will be holding their individual pictures of their Vietnamese village. The traditional structure of Vietnamese society is this. At the very top, you have the king, you have France, you have China. You have all these people that you're sending your taxes to. At the lower levels, you have the cities where they're collecting all the taxes and sending it. At the fundamental structure of Vietnamese society, it is the village. Every single one of you, hypothetically, would be holding a picture of a village that has its own people, its own architecture, and specifically its own industry. And conspicuously, even in the historical record, these villages did what they want. We have records from the last Ming Dynasty that indicated that whenever it came to collecting taxes from the villages, in order to lessen the taxes on themselves, they would simply just not give accurate accounting as to how many people were in their villages. Vietnam, despite all instances and to the contrary, is not a country that has been governed by kings, though it has. The organizational structure of Vietnam is this 25 million in your individual villages. And so, now we run into the issue. And the issue is the propaganda. The propaganda is the August Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. For my own personal purposes, even though I could put the communist flag here, I have not because I don't like it. But imagine the communist flag was included because I hate how it looks. And imagine poking this dumb face right here. It's not included because I hate it. The problem is this. If we check the actual timeline of what occurred, they say that there was a violent revolution that occurred in August. It was all necessary and even gave the Declaration of Independence sometime in September. The problem is that immediately following the end of World War II, the instant the atomic bomb fell, Thao Dai reached out to Viet Minh. The last emperor of Vietnam reached out to Viet Minh and said, okay, colonialism is over. Europe is bombed. This is our opportunity. We need a unified government to treat and meet with the foreigners so that they will cede authority over to the Vietnamese people. Please remember, it is maximum 30,000 French people versus 25 million Vietnamese. And France had just been bombed completely due to World War II. France was not going to be able to protect those people. If there were a unified government to hand it over, probably, hypothetically, so the hypothesis goes, Vietnam could have been just like anyone else. Vietnam could have been like India. Vietnam could have been like Malaysia. Vietnam could have been like Indonesia. None of these countries are perfect, but they did get their independence given to them peaceably around 1945. Instead, We have on August 15th, the official Japanese surrender. We have a second meeting between Bao Dai and the Big Min, in which the Big Min once again rejects the offer to form a coalition government. Bao Dai's edict indicating that he wants to cede power on the 17th of August. And then on the 18th, they have a third and final meeting, desperately imploring the Big Min to take power such that some type of coalition government can be formed to treat with the colonial forces. And the Big Min instead decide to stage their extremely necessary violent revolution to seize power, even though the government was talking to them to give them power. They seized power violently in Hanoi on August 19th. On August 25th of 1945, Bao Dai officially seized power and handed it over to them. And then on September 2nd, Ho Chi Minh offers his Declaration of Independence, having successfully violently seized power. The rest of this is basically how every other organization in Vietnam at the time did not agree with the communists taking power. And the British arrived in September to find no functional government. The French arrived in October to reestablish martial law with the surge of troops. And then the first Indo-Chinese War starts in 1946 after the Big Min break the treaty. But again, this is a point of weakness. A maximum of 30,000 French colonizers in Vietnam at their peak. And so, in the quote, we have in actual correspondence between the government, the royal government of Bao Dai and the Big Min. The representative of the Big Min said, "Our actions are based on our own ideology and program to bring the country to complete independence. We can achieve it ourselves." In Representative of the King said, "The pursuit of independence is also our goal, but since the straight path has many obstacles, we must take a winding route, slowly, perhaps more securely." The representative of the Big Min said, "We only have one straight path to independence, not two." President Kim responded, "According to your way, I fear it will greatly harm the people, and it is uncertain whether you will succeed." The representative said, "We are certain. If harm comes, it does not matter. Only after harm comes benefit. Even if 9 out of 10 people die, we will build a new society from those who remain, which is better than keeping the other 9 parts." What exactly is the problem? We know that although the population of 25 million Vietnamese people, many had collaborated with the French, we also know that this traditional structure of Vietnamese society over here was also extremely amenable to fighting back against the French. But this presents a problem for the Big Min, because a structure of society which is centered around the authority of villagers, independently interacting with the Big Min, independently helping them, independently maintaining their own control, is a problem. Why was it necessary, therefore, to kill all these people? It's at this point I would usually have the activity, at which point I would hand everyone 5 tickets, and then I would go around in a circle. And then the game is played as such. I take on one person at a time, go around in a circle, and the game is, you are allowed to accuse anyone of anything, for any reason. And you are allowed to take all their tickets. Your game, your objective, is to have the maximum number of tickets. Every single time you take tickets from someone, I get 1 ticket. I start with 0 tickets, everyone else starts with 5. By the time we make it all the way around the circle, I have the same number of tickets as there are participants, and only a couple people have tickets left of all. The problem of Vietnam at the time, the problem that had to be resolved by the Big Min, was not a fight against colonialism, but a fight against political control. And so, we have the example of Nguyen Thi Nam. Nguyen Thi Nam is
simultaneously a mega capitalist. But simultaneously, she is an incredible and number one donor to the cause of fighting against the French. I would like to extend the question to the audience. What do you think should happen to Ming Nam? She simultaneously made a lot of money with the French, but she helped Vietnamese a whole lot. Let's see. Anyone? What do we think should happen to Ming Nam? Just quick show of hands. Believe her lunch is good. Raise your hand. And not. Well, what happened with Ming Nam is quite simple. In the land reforms that consolidated power into the Vietnamese Communist Party, Ming Nam was the very first person that they killed in 1952. The absolute very first person. She was a person who went out of her way to help them specifically. Ho Chi Minh specifically killed her. Why Vietnamese independence took so long? It's why instead of concluding in 1945, in 1948, heck, even as late as Indonesia in 1949, why it took until 1975 is because there were two wars going on. There's a war for independence, yes. But there's also a war for total political freedom. So we have pictures from this. This is from Tu Tô Minh Sông. This is a dramatization of land reforms in which anyone could be accused, anyone could have their property taken away from them. Communist people who contributed to the entire enterprise were among the killed. All of that in the name of consolidating political power. This structure had to be taken care of and got rid of in favor of the new king, the Vietnamese Communist Party. And so, in response to this, in 1954, there was the Passage to Freedom. The estimated total population of North Vietnam in 1954 by the current CIA was about 15 million. Despite this, with a single year of notification, 1 million people fled from the north to the south. 1 out of 15 million fled to the north. And at this point, we can transfer over and start with the origins of Little Saigon. Where we would normally be is over at Philippines, which actually back in 1952 looked like this. This is Leonard Precision Products and Company. This is an auto parts manufacturing store, but according to the accounts courtesy of Ms. Marlene Williams, the city of Westminster, back when Vietnamese people first got there, was incredibly poor. There was nothing there. It was unincorporated and broke. That was in 1970. She had been living there since the 1960s. Originally, the place where we started this tour would be just as such. Frank Zhao, for his own purposes, is Chinese Vietnamese, originally from Haiphong. Was one of the groups who tried to escape the north in 1954 to escape the purges of the colonists. He left Haiphong for Da Nang in 1954, and then his family left Da Nang in 1975 for America. Despite having no money whatsoever in 1975, he established his real estate company in 1978 and broke ground on Cocoa Pot in 1986. So the early first few years, Vietnamese were not supposed to make any ethnic communities whatsoever. It is an early refugee policy corroborated by other immigrants at that time that Americans did not want any new Chinatowns existing whatsoever. Vietnamese were literally split into 4 geographic locations all across the United States to be spread out as much as humanly possible across the entirety of the United States. This is very quickly after the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Americans still did not like the idea of Asian people in their own communities. Vietnamese were purposefully split up. Despite this, papers like New Viet came into existence because people wanted to get information about where they were, where their relatives were, and what information they could get by virtue of just being able to get in contact with individuals. And at this point, let me flip over into the personal segment of the tour, which is my baby picture. This is me when I was 3 years old. It's all very cute. However, there is also a reason for this. This is me from 3 years old. We take for granted nowadays that we have Ao Yai available everywhere in the community. If hypothetically the red book, you would look around you and you would see Ao Yai available for sale everywhere. However, at the time, in the 1970s, in the 1980s, this was an incredibly rare thing, and specifically in Vietnam at the time, it was an incredibly rare thing because it was backwards, it was feudal, it was counter-revolutionary. Read. This would be 1990. You remember?
I made those.
This was specifically sewn by my mother at great personal expense. And the political significance of it is this. This is the newspaper for the Fet Festival from 1992. Yes, it's just in my house, don't worry about it. And this is my baby picture in
5 years old.
in that newspaper. It was so important that the promulgation of the continuation of traditional Vietnamese culture amongst the youth, which was a rare thing in the 1980s and 1990s, was a political project that got my picture into the newspaper for effectively doing nothing, being cute. But this is a political project because as the community here began to wear Ao Yai more, it reacted and reflected in Vietnam proper. After the revolution, the community here is the reason Ao Yai started getting repopularized in Vietnam. It is not something that just stayed consistent. The revolution really tried to stamp it out. We kept it alive. We brought it back. And so the community here forms in defiance of Vietnam and of America. Despite the fact Americans did not want any ethnic enclaves, starting from 75, the total population of Vietnamese people in the state of California in 1975 was under 5,000. As of last year, there is approximately only in Orange and LA County, 300,000, over 300,000 Vietnamese. And there's a very, very famous bumper sticker in Orange County from the 80s and 90s that read, "Could the last American leaving cargo please bring the American flag with them?" They like this a lot. It's lovely. And in 1989, when Vietnamese sought to organize a parade honoring Vietnamese and American soldiers who fought against communism, the Westminster City Council member Frank Fry said, "It is my opinion that you're all Americans and you better be Americans. If you want to be South Vietnamese, go back to South Vietnam." That was in 1989. South Vietnam stopped existing in 75. Thank you, Frank Fry. Football pods given to the three Chinese tragedies of front of the mall stand for fortune, prosperity, and longevity. Asian Garden Mall, it was chosen as a name because it's easy to pronounce. Frank Chow originally chose the name for the entire area as Asian Village, but everyone thought it was a terrible name, so no one was for it. Little Saigon, of course, instead. But as you see, right across from Bukopah is actually the very first location of a 99 ranch anywhere in Orange County. It has since been changed ownership, but you still see the green circle that they have barely changed with Adams Supermarket. That is the very first 99 ranch market in all of Orange County. And it is reflective of the fact that at early formation of Little Saigon, Vietnamese did not have enough money to fill out storefronts. And so the center of Little Saigon to this day remains the site of some of the oldest and most diverse cuisines. The further away you get from the center, the more Vietnamese you've got. Case in point, further you get away, Seafood Cove Chinese restaurant has been there, I think, literally since the area came to inception. As for anyone questioning the Chinese roots of Asian Garden Mall in particular, this one's gone pretty much only Chinese people, right? This one's gone, but that's clear. But effectively, we're going back to the structure of traditional Vietnamese society. If you look all around you in Asian Garden Mall, if you look, it is the structure of the village reasserting itself. You have a single individual who is a landowner. You have people who are in the area, like collaborating and working amongst themselves. People chose Asian Garden Mall because it was easier to rent a shop front than it was to get started a business. And people could just start their businesses with 4 or so families putting together money to start things. But this all, once again, mirrors the traditional structure of Vietnamese society. You can see it everywhere around you. Lots of businesses succeeded or failed, but etc. Every single type of business was available. My dad, who got here relatively early mentioned that in 1976, Little Saigon was not in existence, and he would have to drive 45 minutes up to Los Angeles for, in his own description, the worst spot you've ever had in your entire life. And he still did it twice a month. That is the business opportunity for Little Saigon coming into existence, but specifically the traditional structure of Vietnamese society, which was trying to be eradicated, and I would argue is still trying to be eradicated to this day in modern Vietnam, is replicated. Not only in Asian Garden Mall, but everywhere around the community itself. For Asian Garden Mall, you drive up to LA. It's a place you go to buy things, look at their deployment, air. It's a central location for everyone. And crucially, whether they realize it or not, this picture from the recent Set Festival, one of the newest additions that they had added to the Set Festival, is the Vietnamese village. Specifically, the structure, the order, the aesthetics of the Vietnamese village that collaborated with the big men to drive up the French, and then the big men turned around and shot them all together. This royal wedding, this traditional guard, these traditions, this village, all of this is continuing here because it was driven out of Vietnam. And literally, this is the house. In 2003, when the original republic, it featured no Vietnamese soldier or flag whatsoever. In public state council meetings, citizens of Westminster committed to the public record that Vietnamese soldiers were undeserving of commemoration on account of being cowards. Is what we have in the official city records of Westminster from 2002, around the time. And at this point, because I am young enough to have played video games, I would ask all participants, what is more representative of the Vietnam War? Is it going to be the Ewoks from Star Wars, or is it going to be a Call of Duty multiplayer game? I'm sorry to everyone in attendance, this is more for young people. Nevertheless, I will explain. Many young people, my cousins included, this past weekend said, surely if the Ewoks, Americans think of the Vietnam War as the Ewoks versus the Empire. They think of themselves as the incredible, vast empire. They think of the Vietnam as scrappy, small terrorists with little guns that just fought off the incredible, vast powers of the Empire. In fact, George Lucas, who made Star Wars, said that himself in an interview in 2018. George Lucas is really racist, and he's wrong. The The actual fact of the matter is the Vietnam War is closest to Call of Duty multiplayer, which is an army versus an army of roughly equivalent power. It is closer, the Vietnam War, as it concluded, was closer to World War II than it was to killing terrorists. But the current government of Vietnam wants to have it both ways. Simultaneously, they want to say that they were the underdogs, and simultaneously they want to say that they won by virtue of scrap and metal. But none of that is true. In fact, if you wanted courtesy of all of my military autistics who study this stuff, Northern Vietnamese artillery significantly outraged Southern Vietnamese. So if anything, logistically, the South was underprepared. And so a little math. The armed forces, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam had a total of the entire Second Indochina War of 254,000 men. The total number of American casualties was 58,000 men. In terms of multipliers, that is about 4 times the number of American casualties. From 1968 to 1975, the number of dead per year from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam averaged about 25,000 soldiers per year. The total wounded for South Vietnam exceeded 1 million, the total captured exceeded 1 million. Civilian deaths ranged anywhere from 200 to 400,000. This is a quote from the book Lotus in the Storm by Nan Gao. The war was over as far as the Americans were concerned. They had their peace at last. Soon after the Paris Agreement was signed, the North stopped its lip-licking and attacked. Here was the bewildering military reality. 13 enemy divisions, 75 regiments, more than 160,000 troops in all, were still in place in our country. There were also arms and troops that poured down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, more than 4 times the numbers that took part in prior attacks. The Air Force was ordered to reduce air support, cancel airlifts, and reconnaissance flights by half, and reduce helilifts by 7%. We were told to retire more than 200 aircraft in advance of re-existing orders for upgrades. We were instructed to recall 400 pilots from training in the United States. The Navy inactivated more than 600 vessels and rivercraft and reduced river patrols by 72%. Not one plane, ship, or boat was placed after this peace agreement. Our ammunition supply rate had to be reduced. The daily allowance for rifles was set at 1.6 rounds per man. This said the daily allowance for the Americans when they were in the war was 13 rounds. For machine guns, it was 10.6 rounds, while it was 165 for the Americans. For mortars, it was 1.3 rounds, and 16.9 for the Americans. While we were conserving, the enemy was profitable. At Thumb Lake Down border camp, soldiers of the Communist Army shelled the base 300 times, using more than 10,000 rounds over a 16-week period. Knowing this, I asked my father, how does that even work? How do you even fight with 1.6 bullets per day? And he responded, you had to stockpile them. But according to the nice people of the city of Westminster on the public record, Vietnamese soldiers do not deserve commemoration. They were cowards. If you go around to the back of the Vietnam War Memorial, you see plaques for the various companies who donate to assist in the creation of the monument. They're mostly interchangeable. Most of them use the boilerplate language of to all Vietnamese American soldiers who died. Most of them except for one. And this is courtesy of Việt Ali, who in their dedication wrote, in memory of South Vietnamese soldiers who died for Vietnamese freedom. Việt Ali is one of the oldest and most conspicuously refugee-owned businesses in the entire community. If they seem a little angry, the historical context is the people of Westminster decided to come out to City Hall to say that all of their dead relatives were cowards. And we might begin to understand why they're upset. This is the newest monument built entirely with community money. It commemorates the defense of Paracel Islands by the Republic of Vietnam prior to its fall. In 1974, it's supposed, since the issue of sovereignty over the South China Sea is a continuing issue to this day, it is meant to compare and contrast grappling over the same political issue between different regimes and to criticize the current regime for failing to do so properly. And over here, this monument is dedicated to generals and military officers who died by suicide when the country was lost in 1975. I don't go out of my way to say that any of the military officials or individuals involved in this are perfect people. But there is an argument to be said that the entire charge sucks. When Human began its political purge of political allies in 1945, the Vietnamese have a choice on the country split in two in 54. The Vietnamese have a choice on American troops. Were sent in 65, and the Vietnamese have a choice when American troops withdrew their supplies and their soldiers in 73. Despite the fact that Vietnamese haven't been able to choose their own futures, and you could rightfully make the case that the failure to defend the country was none of these people's fault, they still decided to go down the country. They still decided to go down with their charge. And even amongst people who didn't decide to die after failing their charge in 1975, a bunch of generals returned after the war as paramilitaries to try to retake the country and died in the process. The one question that bothers me to this day in configuring this is this. Many of these military officials and generals took their own lives in 1975. It is guaranteed not every single one of them was prepared with poison. Which is to say, if you don't have the poison, how do you choose the order in your family? The Boat People Memorial in Westminster Memorial Park was established in 2009. It's one of the later monuments in the community itself by virtue of one particular fact. The organization refused to accept money from boat people, and therefore it took a very long time to gather that money. From 1975 to 1997, over 800,000 Vietnamese people escaped the country by boat. Of that number, about 400,000 immigrated to the United States. According to the UN High Commission for Refugees, the approximate number of boat people who died in transit was anywhere from 200 to 250,000 people. A report commissioned by the same office indicated that in 1981, 452 ships left Thailand. The total number of people on board all the ships combined was just over 15,000 people. Among those 452 ships, 349 have been attacked, averaging about 3 attacks per boat. 228 women have been kidnapped, 881 people have been murdered or gone missing. The Boat People organization is particularly unique insofar as when the monument was first dedicated, that monument did not have a national flag at all. No America, no South Vietnamese, certainly no current Vietnamese flag. The Boat People came from the entire country, north, south, didn't matter where. What joined them is they were mostly depicted in this statue. Women, children, the elderly. Carved into the monument itself, circling it in a path that literally forms an infinity symbol, are the names of people who died at sea and remembered only by people who remembered who died alongside the impact. Definitionally, the list will never be complete. few years ago, I personally was here for an event. They invited up a congressional representative to speak and ask some platitudes. Someone from the audience sprung up and spoke into the microphone, screamed into it rather. Because of you, our families died. It's because of you that this is all we have left. Nobody translated those comments into English for the representative here. And typically, since this part of the tour is outside in Memorial Park, I typically ask people and bring along incense that they'd like to leave one for all the people who died, all the civilians who died. And at this point, would everyone like to hear a song by a terrorist? Was born in 1958, September 8th, died 2013, September 20th at the age of 55. He was among the artists who organized the refugee community in diaspora for his triumphs of writing such songs. He was deemed an enemy of the state, a terrorist, for his triumphs of these songs, and was bestowed the status of kill on sight, were he ever to return to Vietnam. He died in Downton Valley. His heart remained focused on Vietnam until his last day. The last question I have for everyone as we walk through the cemetery is this. And the question answers what the monument is, which is what happens to the National Cemetery of a country that stopped existing. A few years after the war ended, the government got in contact with people overseas. They informed people that if they did not pay a fee to get their relatives' remains reinterred from the National Cemetery, everyone would be dug up and then buried in mass graves. This headstone that exists in Westminster Memorial Park exists for people who didn't have the money in that time to get their relative remains reinterred. This is what remains of South Vietnam's, Republic of Vietnam's National Cemetery. From 1945 And in terms of the bloodshed, the country is united in 75. And the deaths don't really stop in 97, well, let's just say it stopped in 97. The latest country that got their independence peacefully was Indonesia. It took them 4 years. Vietnam had over 50 years of warfare, bloodshed, and death. But it's in service to democracy and the great communist revolution. How's that going? Again, what thousands must die so that Caesar may become great. And remember, Ho Chi Minh is great because democracy is there in Vietnam and the socialist revolution has worked out. How's that going on? Right, sorry. No, this is Vietnam's first billionaire in the communist country. So it's working out great. And everyone died for a very, very good cause. This is not to say that the community gave up. During the 80s and 90s, the community funded paramilitary groups that were sent back into Vietnam with the objective of trying to liberate Vietnam from the current regime, and they funded it. Many a restaurant, not all of them, but Bun was definitely one of them, that funded the paramilitary groups with proceeds from their restaurant menus to fund this organization to try and liberate Vietnam. Basic math will explain why that didn't work. But the community's hopes, ambitions, and dreams of seeing a better, peaceable, just, and democratic Vietnam continues. It ends as such, but the hopes and dreams continue. Thank you, everyone.